Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're going deep into the world of sexting and the law. You sent over a whole bunch of articles on this, so I guess you're really looking to unpack this. Maybe you're prepping for something,
Wow.
getting ready for a new job, or just curious about the legal side of things. Either way, we're here to help. We're going to try to break down this really complex topic, especially when it comes to, minors and all that. And to guide us through this legal maze, we have an expert on, well, cyber law and minors' rights. I think you might be a little surprised by some of the things we're going to talk about today. It really makes you rethink some assumptions about, sexting and what's considered private and what's actually a crime. So let's jump right in. I mean, we all kind of have a general idea of what sexting is,
hmm
but legally speaking, why is it such a big deal these days, especially with, all the smartphones and social media everywhere?
Well, the biggest issue is how the law handles these images. When they involve anyone under 18, a lot of times they're classified as child pornography.
Really? So even if it's like two teenagers sending those pictures to each other, like willingly, it's still a crime.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's kind of where things get tricky because we have these laws to protect minors, these child exploitation laws. But then even if it's consensual between, two teenagers, it can still fall under those laws.
That's kind of shocking. I think most people just assume that as long as, everyone's okay with it, it's fine. It's like a private thing.
Yeah.
But you're saying it's not.
Not legally.
Okay.
Legally, it's not because, the law doesn't really see a difference between like a minor taking that picture themselves and sending it
Right.
versus an adult like taking and distributing that same picture. It's all kind of seen as the same thing.
Wow. So, okay, what about age of consent then? Because most people know there's a legal age
Mm-hmm.
for like sexual activity. How does that work with sexting? Is it the same?
Well, that's another big misunderstanding. There is an age of consent for sexual activity, but when it comes to sexting, it's totally different. So, for example, a 17-year-old sending a nude picture to another 17-year-old could still face consequences.
Even though they're both like technically old enough
Right.
for other stuff.
Exactly.
Wow. So even if they're like dating
Mm-hmm.
or close in age,
Yeah.
still could be a problem.
That's the reality.
Mm.
And it's not even just sending, like receiving it, storing it, even just looking at these images could be a criminal offense.
It can.
Doesn't matter if it felt private, at the time. Legally, it's different.
Wow, that's a minefield. It's hard enough for like adults to wrap their heads around, let alone, teenagers.
Yeah.
I bet a lot of people listening had no idea how serious this is. So if someone is caught, what are the consequences? I mean, are we talking about like a slap on the wrist or is it, more serious than that?
Oh, no. It can be really serious. We're talking about criminal charges, even having to register as a sex offender, a permanent criminal record. That could affect, going to college or getting a job, housing, you name it.
Yeah, that's heavy stuff.
Mm.
And I can't even imagine what that does, not just to the teenager, but their families as well. All the emotional stuff on top of the legal ramifications.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely makes you think. It seems like prevention and education are so important,
Yeah.
especially for, parents and teachers. What can they do? I mean, how can we help these kids make better choices and avoid these situations in the first place?
I think the most important thing is to be open, really
Mm.
communicate. We need to go beyond that typical birds and the bees talk.
Right.
Have real conversations about like digital intimacy, all the risks that come with sexting. Teenagers need to know that what they share online, well, it can have real consequences.
Yeah, I think that's probably the hardest part for a lot of parents, like how to even stroke that conversation. It's such it's a sensitive topic.
Yeah, and a good place to start might be to emphasize that the internet, well, it doesn't really have a delete button.
Right.
Once you share something, it's really hard to completely erase it. Screenshots, forwards, cloud storage, all that.
So even if you think it's gone.
It's probably still out there.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's not just about like sending explicit stuff. It's also about receiving it and storing it.
Exactly. Even possessing that material can get you in trouble.
Oh, okay. What about social media then? Because it seems like things can spread so quickly, right? Like what starts as a private message between like two people can suddenly be seen by everybody.
Right. And that's one of the biggest risks. Teenagers really need to understand that they lose control, Even if they consented to sharing it initially, once it's out there, who knows who's going to see it,
It's a good reminder that there's really no privacy online. But, even with all these precautions, kids are going to make mistakes. So if a minor is caught, are there any legal defense?
Well, there are some, but they're limited, especially when it comes to sexting you've probably heard of, like the Romeo and Juliet laws.
Right.
They're meant for cases where, the two people are close in age,
Right. Right.
but they usually don't apply to these cases.
So even if they're dating, and it's consensual, that doesn't really matter.
Yeah, the law can be pretty strict about this, even if, they weren't trying to hurt anybody. Prosecutors have some leeway, but generally they see this as a pretty serious offense.
No matter what.
Yeah.
Okay. So prosecutorial discretion, that sounds like kind of a wild card then. What does that even mean? How does that work?
So prosecutorial discretion, basically it means they get to decide how to handle each case. Whether to file charges, offer a plea deal, or even just drop the whole thing. It really depends on the situation.
Okay.
Like how old the people are, what exactly happened.
So even if the law is really clear, there's still a lot of gray area.
Yeah, there is. And that's why it's so important to have a good lawyer. Someone who can, really understand the law and fight for the best outcome.
Right. So it's not always just black and white.
No.
There are options.
Exactly.
Okay. So what about the laws themselves? You mentioned earlier that there's some people want to change them, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to minors, especially. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of people who think these laws are just, way too harsh. They think they don't really take into account how teenagers behave, especially with, technology and all that.
Yeah.
It's not the same as it used to be.
Right.
So some people want to create a whole new category for, when it's consensual between teenagers.
Okay.
That way it wouldn't be treated the same as child pornography.
So it'd be a more nuanced approach.
Yeah, exactly.
Looking at the situation, not just the law.
Exactly. And
Right.
other people are pushing for more education programs rather than just punishment.
So instead of sending these kids to jail, we try to teach them.
Exactly. Help them understand the risks without, ruin their lives.
Right. Because a criminal record can really affect their future.
It can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there any states that are actually doing this, changing the laws?
Yeah, some states are trying to create those Romeo and Juliet exceptions.
Specifically for sexting?
Specifically for sexting.
Okay.
Because, two teenagers, even if they're doing something they shouldn't, it shouldn't necessarily ruin their lives.
Right. Right. And it makes sense. So it's trying to find that balance between, protecting the kids, but also being realistic about how things are today.
Exactly.
Okay. So we talked about, preventing it, the laws, and how they might change. But what can parents and teachers do, right now? Are there, specific tools or resources, to help everyone navigate this whole digital world?
Yeah, there are. There are some great organizations out there, like
Yeah.
Common Sense Media, Connect Safely.
Good
They
deal.
have tons of information
Yeah.
on digital citizenship, how to stay safe online.
Okay.
Got to talk to your kids about all this.
Those sound good. What about, parental controls? Are those helpful?
Yeah, definitely. You can set limits on screen time, block certain websites or apps. You can even monitor their activity.
Right. And it's not about, spying on them. It's about, keeping them safe, especially when they're younger.
Right. It's about guidance.
Right.
And, technology changes so fast.
Yeah.
We all have to keep learning, keep up with the trends, and, talk to each other.
The more we know, the better.
Exactly.
Okay. So for any teenagers who might be listening out there, you're not alone. It's normal to, be curious about sex and relationships. But just be smart. Be safe. Remember what we talked about. Those choices you make online can have real consequences.
Right. And don't be afraid to say no. If something makes you uncomfortable, online or in person, you can always say no.
Yeah. That's so important. Setting boundaries. We've covered a lot today. And before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you said earlier about how, once something's online, it's there forever. So what can people do to protect themselves? I mean, how do you manage your, digital footprint?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And honestly, it's something we should all be thinking about.
Right. Not just teenagers.
Not just teenagers.
Okay.
So the first thing is be really careful about what you share. Because once it's out there, it can be really hard to remove it completely.
Even if you think you deleted it.
Even if you think you deleted it.
So think before you post.
Think before you post.
If you're not sure, maybe just don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also check your privacy settings.
Right. On social media and all that.
Yeah, make sure you understand who can see your stuff.
Okay. It's easy to just ignore those settings,
Yeah. Yeah.
But we should really pay attention.
Yeah.
Okay. Another thing is be careful about getting tagged in photos and posts. Right, because other people might not be as careful as you are.
Exactly.
Okay.
You don't want your future boss to see something embarrassing.
Yeah, or colleges.
Exactly.
What about, like, Googling yourself? Is that a good idea?
It is.
Yeah.
It's a good way to see what's out there about you.
Right.
And if there's something wrong, you can try to get it taken down.
So it's like taking stock of your online self.
Exact.
Okay, it's like, yeah, being aware of how you're presenting yourself online, just like you would in person.
Exactly.
Okay, well, we've covered a ton today, like everything from the laws to prevention, even managing our online presence. As we wrap up, what's the one thing you really want our listener to remember from all of this?
Mm. I think the biggest takeaway is that, sexting, especially when it involves minors, it's a really serious issue. There are legal consequences, even if it seems like a private thing.
Right.
And even beyond the law, it's about talking to these kids, giving them the information they need to stay safe.
Right, so it's not just about scaring them, it's about giving them the tools to make good choices.
Exactly.
Okay, well, that's a great point to end on. And for our listener, I'll leave you with this. We talked about how some of these laws might be a bit outdated, not really fit for the digital age. But are there any good reasons to keep them? Where do we draw the line between protecting kids and, criminalizing normal teenage behavior?
Hmm.
It's a tough question, and there's no easy answer. So think about it. And thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious.